Hello and welcome to my talk on developer insights for Germany. Before I delve into the information, let me introduce myself. My name is Franziska Haug, and I'm Principal People Lead at SAP Signavio, and I'm a qualified coach. I've been living and breathing my passion topics of leadership, organizational development, diversity, mediation, coaching, and communication, mostly in engineering and product organizations for the last decade. You can find me on LinkedIn, Medium, and Polywork. So why are we looking into developer insights? Why is that an interesting topic? It is coveted data / information for folks in developer relations, developer marketing, and of course, mostly for hiring managers. So hiring managers, of course, want to get an understanding of where they can find good talent, how they can add that talent to their company. This is relevant for employer branding as well. And ultimately, it's really, really good information to have when you are, for example, a job seeker yourself. As a hiring manager myself, I've been extensively leveraging the information that I've researched. What is the data that we have available for these kind of insights? There are a couple of sources that we can consult, and mostly known are the surveys. So for example, the Stack Overflow survey, but we also have data providers that aggregate insights from their own communities. We also have talent agencies that aggregate data. We have oftentimes internal talent teams. Big tech organizations usually have a talent intelligence team or several of those. We also have platforms that we can leverage like Meetup, where we can see where are developers meeting. And ultimately, we also have data from the government, mostly on the job market. So what are the areas that I've been focusing on in my research for the last years? What is interesting, of course, is to understand the profile or the profiles that are out there. So what kind of languages are developers using? Which languages have become more popular? What is the age? What is the educational level, etc.? So to get an understanding of the developer population as individuals, but also as a whole. We can look into the communities that are forming, for example, online communities, Discord, Slack, etc., offline communities that are increasingly meeting in person again from this year onward. What is also interesting is the job market, of course, to have job market data. So how many applicants, how many job seekers do we have in a certain location or a certain country? And then local data, of course, which in a way relates to the communities as well, relates to the job market as well, to understand where are the most developers, where have developer populations grown over the last years. And lastly, underrepresented groups. Do we see, for example, an increase in the representation? Do we see a decrease? Can we actually measure the data? So all of those are areas that are interesting to look at and to extract data on, and then ultimately interpret the data that we have. Why specifically Germany? Why have I been focusing on Germany as a country? First of all, I'm German, and I've mostly, with a few exceptions, lived here my whole life. And also through my freelance work, through looking into it for job-related purposes, I've been very strongly focusing on Germany for the last years. The data set that I have is from end of 2021. So the corresponding numbers of what we are working with, what we are looking at is the information from end of 2021. This is for Germany, about 83 million inhabitants and 45 million working population. Germany is a European powerhouse when it comes to engineering and IT. We have a lot of issues and a lot of challenges when it comes to digitization and making sure we're up to speed with everything that's happening. That being said, we do have a very, very large developer population within Europe, but also in comparison to other countries and other areas worldwide. And traditionally, we've always had a very strong STEM orientation, which again, we need to invest in to make sure we are up to date. So how many developers do we actually have in Germany? Where are they located? And what can we glean from that information? First of all, it's good to understand the overall IT landscape. And what you see here is a graph from Bitkom. This is an association that every year collects data on how many open positions have been were kept unfilled at the end of the year, right? So how many positions companies were unable to fill. And with the exception of Corona, which definitely put a break into the development, we see that for every year, the number of positions that we couldn't fill has been growing and growing and growing. So in 2018, we had about 82,000 positions in all of IT. So we're talking about developers, IT salespeople, we're talking about maybe sysadmins. So all of those positions, we have 82,000 positions that were left unfilled. 2019, we already have 124,000. And then this drops to 86,000 in 2020 and 96,000 in 2021, only for 2022 to show us that again it increased to 137,000. So Corona could be seen as an outlier because we've had layoffs and then a very strong hiring and then layoffs again. But overall, we see that the number is growing and the demand is growing. So it's important to have the next generations coming up, the people that are the experts, that are becoming the experts, to fill these positions, to remain competitive, and to remain or to continue to invest in a very strong digital economy. When we look at the overall number of IT specialists that the data identifies, we have about 941,030 IT specialists at the end of 2021. Mind you, this is the number that we have for the salaried IT specialists. So the freelance specialists are not included in that number. All of the studies that I looked at, both from the government as well as independent studies, identified that about 10 to 15% of all specialists work as freelancers. So we can safely assume that in Germany, we have 1 million to 1,100,000 IT specialists at the end of 2021. Of course, with 2022 and the numbers hopefully soon coming in, we will probably see, my assumption would be that this has already grown. And we see that with 83 million inhabitants, over 1 million of those people work in the area of IT. That is significant. And that's definitely shows us that, yes, Germany is a powerhouse and it does have a large number of folks that work in IT. When we boil that down to the actual developers, we have in the government data subcategories that identifies specifically those people to us that have the marker of developer. So backend developer, frontend developer, DevOps engineer, for example, all those are categorized into this category. And it is the largest subcategory within the area of IT. We have 281,380 developers in Germany at the end of 2021. And this number has been steadily rising for the last years. I looked into it for the last 5-6 years, and every year we see a very, very strong increase. Mostly over the last 5 years, an increase on average of about 20 to 40%, depending on location. This is immense. So it shows that, again, as the Bitkom showed, as the Bitkom detailed in their number, the demand is increasing, and Germany is a country that is very attractive to move to or to invest into your education, into your skill set as a developer. Now, when we look at where are the developers, where are the local regional centers, where are the most developers, this is what the data actually identifies to us. And this is great. This is not data that used to be found in the studies, because all of the studies were addressed towards a certain community, and that was heavily influenced by who was in that community. But the government agencies do identify the data for the regional Federal Agency for Employment District to us, and that helps us to identify where are the big centers and the big hubs. Now, the interesting thing is that at first glance, when we look at the map of Germany, we see that it's very, very different from countries like UK, France, Portugal, where usually you have a capital region or a digital hub, and 60 to 80% of all developers would be located there. In France, this would be Paris. In the UK, this would be London. In Portugal, this would be Lisbon, with maybe Porto coming into play as well. Germany is different. Germany is decentralized. Though when we look at the map more closely, we see that, yes, there are certain digital centers and areas where we would expect to have a higher population. Now, on the map, I've highlighted the places that, both from their numbers as well as from their reputation and their standing in the digital sphere, are considered to be digital centers. There are other centers that do sometimes have higher numbers than those seen here, but they are not, let's say, traditionally considered to be digital hubs. This might change with the growing awareness that we see developer populations growing there and growing there massively. Now, what we see here is that Munich and its satellite city of Augsburg have about 10.5% of all developers. Almost 30,000 developers are living and working in Munich and Augsburg and the satellite towns around it. The second largest hub is Berlin with 8.8% and almost 25,000 developers. Berlin and Potsdam, I have to say, though Berlin takes the major share among the developer numbers. We have, or traditionally we've had the assumption that Hamburg comes third place. This is wrong. The numbers clearly show that Hamburg, being a very metropolitan, being a very large city, does not necessarily come in third place. We have other centers like Stuttgart, for example, Göppingen, the area around it, that have a lot of digitally oriented, engineering-oriented companies, and Stuttgart and its close surroundings make up 6.4% or over 18,000 of developers. And also we see that the east of the country, so the eastern federal states, do not have a lot of hubs. They do not have a lot of centers that go over the threshold of, I would say, 1,000, 1,500 developers. But we do see that the West, in particular, Northern Rhine-Westphalia, with its hubs in Cologne, Bonn, and Düsseldorf, Ruhrgebiet, also Frankfurt, a strong fintech and finance center with about 7% and almost 20,000 developers. Frankfurt, Wiesbaden, Mainz, Darmstadt, that area has a strong focus. And then, of course, the digital or traditionally digital centers like Karlsruhe, like Mannheim and Heidelberg, with respectively 3% and 1.4% of all developers. You do find companies there that have for decades invested into their digital footprint. So this is very interesting to look at, of course, to see that the West has such a strong impact. Overall, the biggest federal state in terms of developer numbers is actually Bavaria. And this is not surprising considering that Munich almost harbors about half of developers in that federal state. And then Nuremberg is also a very, very strong hub with about 4.9% of all developers. Now, when we look at which numbers or how have the numbers grown over the last years, there are also some surprises to be had. The numbers that were available were the numbers for the last 5 years, so 2017 to 2021. And it becomes very, very clear when we zoom in closer that the biggest growth is in Berlin. 58% growth over the last 5 years. This is impressive. Almost 10,000 developers have been gained in sheer numbers in Berlin and Potsdam. The city with the highest growth is not necessarily Berlin proper per se, but the whole area, the whole hub there has seen the most growth. We also see that in almost all of the centers, we have a growth of over 30% for the last 5 years. This is impressive, right? This again shows how much we're evolving and how much demand there is for this kind of skill set. Other strong growth we see in Frankfurt, for example, and also in Düsseldorf and Ruhrgebiet. Düsseldorf per se has seen a very, very strong investment over the last years. We also see a very high growth in upcoming hubs like Halle Leipzig and Dresden, which have for the last years also very strongly invested into their digital companies and digital spheres. So very encouraging numbers to see. There are two things that I wanted to highlight in the numbers. The actual data does not identify too many subcategories or subsets, but what you can identify is the ratio of women and men. The data does not distinguish men, women, non-binary. It only goes into the binary, so we have a little bit of a limitation, but it does give us some insight into how many women, how many men do we have in these hubs and locations. First off, it's very, very important to understand that Germany has a very, very strong overrepresentation of men in the developer sphere. 86.5% of all developers in Germany are men. And this, of course, impacts on how products are built and how they are shaped, right? And this, of course, is then mirrored in the numbers for the women that we see. So on this map, you see the percentage of women by the regional hubs out of all of the women that are developers. And here we see mostly and largely corresponding numbers to the overall distribution for developers. They don't differ that much. However, what becomes very, very clear, and it also became evident when I looked into the more regional data in the more rural areas, women are attracted to the big cities. And the city that has not only seen the biggest growth, but also is becoming the hub with the largest representation of women over time is Berlin. So Berlin-Potsdam area is the area where women are migrating to, are gravitating towards. And of course, Munich is still the city, the area with the biggest impact, not surprising. For the last decades, we have had big tech companies located there. We've had a very, very strong, robust economy that hasn't seen that much negative influence, only growth at the end of the day. So also not surprising to see the numbers there. However, it is intriguing to see that particularly Nuremberg, Fürth, Erlangen, so the Franconia, the region where I come from, has a very, very strong footprint when it comes to the representation of women. So that seems to be an area that has attracted them in larger numbers. Also, Düsseldorf is the single city with the highest growth among the women developer population. Overall, what becomes glaringly apparent is that the actual numbers, the absolute numbers, are just very, very small. And again, with an overrepresentation of over 86% of men among developers, this does not come as a surprise. When I consult my community, the perceptions, the opinions are very often that the vast majority of women that are in the technical sphere in Germany are expats, are people that come from other countries and other areas to Germany, because Germany has been failing massively at investing into women and ensuring that women can grow in this particular area. So this is actually very sad and depressing to see. In any case, we have the numbers, we know the numbers, so we can do something about them, hopefully, right? Also, this is, of course, as I said, mirrored in the growth that we have seen over the last years. So Berlin takes the cake with 95% of growth among the software developers that are women over the last years. Also, Munich is not very far behind, 55%. Düsseldorf Ruhrgebiet has also very, very strong growth, 68%. So they must be doing something right over there and making sure that their representation is much more balanced, or is becoming much more balanced. But also when you look at the numbers, there you see, just like with the overall numbers, very, very strong growth in every hub, in every region. Over 30% is the usual rule when you are a digital hub. And this is actually encouraging to see. We are seeing the growth of jobs, of positions that are open and that remain to be filled. And yeah, we'll see how that goes over the next years. The last topic that I would like to give you a glimpse about are the hidden champions. So, of course, looking at the numbers and understanding that Munich, 30,000 people are developers there, big area, big investment, that's good to see. But I thought to myself, Germany being decentralized, there must be some hidden treasures in what we would consider more rural areas, or at least the cities and towns that are sort of off the beaten digital path. And indeed, when I looked into the numbers, I was proven right. In this map, you see an overview of all the places that I didn't feature in the previous map that have a developer population of 1,500 and higher. So when you go there with, for example, a startup, you could expect to have good hiring chances. And we see some astonishing surprises in the data. We have areas like Aachen, with 1.77% of all developers, almost 5,000 developers that are there. Aachen also has a very high share of trainee developers. This is encouraging to see. We also have a large population in Konstanz, which is around Lake Bodensee, with 1.12% of all developers living and working there, slightly over 3,000. What was also very, very surprising to see was that the areas of Bielefeld, Herford, and Paderborn, which you see on the upper left-hand side in velvet and green, you wouldn't expect this, right? Northern Rhine-Westphalia for decades has been sort of, very traditional economy and also not trendy cities, not Berlin, not Munich, not Hamburg, not Frankfurt, not the cities that would usually attract people. But you do see that, yes, there is a digital sphere there is investment, and we've seen also the numbers grow just as much as in the other areas. So yeah, it shows that Germany, with its history, with its tradition, of course, has a very, very interesting history of being decentralized. And we see this to this day in the numbers represented in the developers. Then there are some other surprises, of course. My hometown, Würzburg, also has about 1,700 developers. Bamberg, which you would associate mostly with historic tours and old palaces and not necessarily with developers. But also close to Munich, Regensburg and Ingolstadt have a strong footprint. And we also see high numbers in Bremen, Oldenburg in that region, and in Braunschweig and Goslar. So really, really interesting to see that, yes, we do have developers in these areas and we could set up companies there, we could hire there successfully. What is glaringly apparent, again, is that the East does not feature a lot of developers. The only place, apart from Halle, Leipzig, and Dresden, that goes over 1,500 developers is Erfurt, with 0.58% of all developers. And not surprising to me, because I know the city a little bit. I know people that have studied there and come from there. But yeah, it's very, very obvious that the separation of Germany and the consequences out of that have ensured now that in the East, we don't see a lot of digital centers, or at least not very strong digital centers coming up. So this was just a glimpse into the data, right? I just wanted to give you a little bit of a taste of what is out there. And there is much more to dig into over the course of the next month and years. But for those of you that want more information, want the alt texts, and want all of the numbers transcribed, as well as other research that I've been doing on the numbers that I have, please visit my blog on Medium. It's franziska-haug.medium.com, and you will find all of the info there. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for your interest in the topic of developer insights. And yeah, we'll see what else we can find out and what other thrilling insights we can have over the next couple of years. Thank you very much.